On August 26, 2021, just 4 days before the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, Burlington, Massachusetts native Jill Kornetsky, who grew up at Temple Shalom Emeth, and her Afghani associate were whisked from Jill's apartment in Kabul to a secret CIA base outside the city, where they were flown by helicopter to Kabul airport just 1 day before the entire CIA compound was blown up by the Americans. She was then flown to Qatar, where she began her journey back to the United States. Jill had been living in Afghanistan since January of 2015. A graduate of Harvard University with a dual master's from Brandeis University's Heller School in Sustainable International Development and Coexistence and Conflict, with a fellowship in Persian language and culture, she felt called to help the people of Afghanistan. Today we will hear Jill tell her story on a Zoom call with members of Temple Shalom Emeth. She will tell us about her continuing initiatives in Afghanistan. She will give us the details of her amazing journey back to the United States. Neesha Suarez, the Director of Constituent Services for Congressman Seth Moulton, will speak about her efforts to get Jill out of the country as well. Welcome to this special edition of Spiritually Speaking. Jill, it's so great to have you with us, and we're all so glad you're back safe and sound. And I was wondering if we could start off by your telling us a little bit about what you were doing in Afghanistan.
So I went originally on a USAID contract doing project management of monitoring and evaluation, which gives a really good picture into all that's happening. I moved into the private sector. I worked for one of the large banks. I tried to work with a lot of local partners. I kept looking for a place because aid was so ineffective and it was so corrupt. Over time, I came to the conclusion that if I wanted to do the work that I wanted to do, I was going to have to figure out a way to earn funds in order to do the work. So for the last few years, I've been focused on social enterprise and nonprofits. I've got a benefit corporation and a nonprofit 501c3. And the goal is to look at Afghanistan the way it is. The two largest earning industries in Afghanistan are agriculture and mining. As much as we tried, we're not going to make it the next tech hub or the next financial hub. So how do we use those two in order to generate enough revenue to implement sort of stability and sustainability operations? The best earning one that we could find is mining, and the best of those is gemstones. Afghanistan is some of the best gemstones on the planet, every kind you can think of except diamonds. Historically, they've been smuggled, and all of those revenues are lost either to criminal enterprises or to terrorist enterprises. So working with local community members and local miners, it was my intent to wholesale rough gemstones, to do a responsible operation where we reinvest in the community and certify those gemstones with certificates of origin done with advanced testing, because trust is an issue in the market. Use those profits to develop a cutting house to keep the rest of the profits, or as much of the profits as possible, in country. And if we're going to go through that effort, if we're going to invest in the equipment and all of the time that it takes to train people, let's do it for the most vulnerable ones. Let's do it for the women. Let's do it for war widows and people who have become single breadwinners in their families. They don't earn a lot in Kabul. They'll clean houses for $50 a month, or they will usually beg on the streets or turn to prostitution. So there's a big window there that's not being met of finding appropriate ways to employ women. Once we're able to cut stones and sell rough gemstones, that's a lot of revenue. That's plenty of money to do all of the development work we want to do. Looking at whole of village platforms, looking at what's worked in the past and what hasn't, and picking the best of both worlds and putting it into something that will be more effective. So that is in mining communities and agricultural rural communities, doing food security initiatives, doing homesteading, which is just self-reliance on the family and community level. So that was the plan, and I was waiting for the legal avenue for gemstones because there was not a legal permitting process to export them. And as of Ramadan 2020, they passed a permitting process. So I had gone home to meet with my board and expand my board and come back to Afghanistan to go and get that permit. I was supposed to do that on August 8th. My board member who was going to help me with that in Afghanistan had a funeral to go to. We rescheduled for the 15th, and the 15th is when Kabul fell. So in terms of exiting Kabul, I wasn't intending to leave originally. On the 15th, there was a crush of people going to the airport, which makes the area around the airport very dangerous. And I didn't see the need to get involved with that while we saw what happened. They did take Kabul, but it was nonviolent. They didn't need to fight their way in. It was just handed to them. Over time, different things started happening. First, my assistant in his village, one of the villages outside of Afghanistan, was threatened. So he was threatened by the Taliban coming to his home and warning them that we know you work with an American or with the Americans. So if your son comes home again, we'll kill him. They didn't know he worked for an independent person who doesn't work for the government and doesn't work for intelligence or the military, that I'm just there doing nonprofit things and social enterprise things. But all they heard was American, and that's enough for now. Going forward, we started to look at ways to get him out because I was worried about his safety. And I looked through, I knew he wasn't eligible for an SIV. I wasn't aware of the P2 program at that time. So it was a matter of contacting pretty much everybody I knew at Pentagon, state, USAID, people inside the country who work for those organizations, independent people in the country who work for those organizations. And at that time, Rabbi had also contacted Seth Moulton's office because she works with him on different intercultural affairs. So I had been contacted by Neesha. I had been contacted by a friend of my father's son who was ex-Special Forces and knew the teams in country working with people. At one point, the Taliban came to our building. They went to the security office with the security staff. They very politely requested all of the government-issued weapons and vehicles that were in the building. Because my building was secure, we had ministers of parliament, the attorney general of Afghanistan, different generals lived in the building. I didn't really know them, but they were there. So they knew that there would be government-issued weapons and vehicles. And then they parked a guy in the corner outside to wait for any vehicles that they weren't able to get. And they politely thanked them and left. And they have not been back since to our building. At one point, my assistant thought they were in the building, and that was difficult. He was about 8 when the Taliban last ruled Afghanistan, and he remembers the humiliation, he remembers the atrocities, he remembers starving. They had nothing to eat for years but potatoes and mulberries. So he was quite afraid, and it became clear that I definitely had to get him out for his own safety and for his own well-being. Over time, we got in touch with the Special Forces Brigade that was doing very limited runs through the city to physically pick people up. The Brits had been doing it, but the Americans had not. There were some miscommunications over 2 separate nights, and I was supposed to be picked up and was not. That was around the 20th, maybe. I had kept booking commercial airline tickets into the future because I know with the people I spoke to that the Qataris will be in charge of the airport and they'll get it open eventually. So in my mind, that was a possibility as well. Around the 25th, I was contacted by somebody identifying themselves as the American Coordination Cell. Based on the language they were using and the way they were speaking, I could tell they were either Special Forces or intelligence. They had arranged a place near the airport, but not associated with the airport, where people could transit out of Afghanistan. They were having people drive in small groups to not attract attention to this place. And after a day or two of coordination, the neighbor's chef had taken us in his Civic. They had an armored vehicle and they were being allowed to drive it, but they were stopped more often. So we took a Civic with a broken air conditioner. He came and picked us up at the door and we waited across town. Should have been about an hour or two's drive. It ended up being 2 or 3. There was traffic everywhere, the Taliban trying to direct traffic, which was not working well. Eventually, after about 3 hours, we made it to a base far outside of town. There was an industrial area called Policharki. There's also the prison out there. But it's not the city at all. Eventually, you're just driving and it's farms and gas depots. We turned into a drive, and that was the camp. It was a walled camp, a very large walled camp. It's a short drive to the airport, but as a crow flies, but not with cobble roads. From there, we were notified that they were waiting for us. They let us inside. They were surprised that there was a foreigner because there were Afghans at the gate, and they were saying Kharij means foreigner. And got inside, met with 4 gentlemen in t-shirts and tattoos and, the sunglasses and the watches that are indicative of either SF or intelligence. They took our electronics. They took us up to a morale, welfare, and recreation area with pool tables and dartboards and a coffee bar, and told us to take whatever we wanted, make ourselves comfortable. Throughout the day, another 200 to 300 Afghans came in, mostly families. From there, we waited until sunset. The helicopters would not fly during the day because of the Daesh problem, ISIS problem. Eventually, at sunset, they drove us up to a helicopter pad. They landed Hueys and Chinooks. They took out all of the Afghan Special Forces families. That was the deal they had made with them, if they would guard the airport and this location, which was Eagle Base. They would take their families with them when they left, and they went out when we went out, so they kept their promise there. We took a 4-minute helicopter ride to the airport. We were held in different areas. The airport was trashed. The air operations were very efficient, but the airport itself was just trashed. We watched as Turkish and Japanese and Swedish and Australian guards and special forces all loaded onto their planes and left. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, they loaded us onto AC-17, we weren't sure if it was going to Dubai or Qatar, but there were about 250 of us, or maybe 300 on the plane. Everybody sat on the floor, closed up the tailgate, and took off. We were in the air for about 3 hours, and we landed at Qatar's military base. I guess it's a multinational base. It's the biggest stretch of concrete I've ever seen in my life. And from there, we met with State Department staff. They separated us into, my assistant was with me, so I went to the Afghan side. They had wedding tents set up to hold people and mattresses on the floor. There were over 1,000 Afghans there, I would say. And they were doing their best, but there still weren't facilities for the people in wheelchairs. It was hard to get information about whether my assistant was on any lists. I refused to leave until I was sure he was on a list to get out. By nightfall, he wanted me to leave. He didn't want me there at night, and the Marines on site wanted me to leave as well. So they took me over to the American side of the airport. It was quite a wait there. There was a COVID test, there were boxed dinners, there were bathrooms but no showers. Eventually we were told that the plane had a breakdown and we wouldn't be flying out that night. So they distributed blankets and pillows, and we found spaces in some military tents with cots and chairs. Around 2 a.m. they woke us up. They took us down to the tarmac and they loaded us onto a regular United Airlines jetliner. And from there we went to Dulles. Landing in Dulles, we spent a long time waiting in immigration. There was another COVID test. There was, they took us to a separate area than other passengers because not everybody who left had been properly vetted. So they had us go through immigration one by one. It took about 5 or 6 hours. From there, I had been offered to stay at a hotel arranged by the Public Health Service, but I took off and went to a hotel by myself for a few days. And then we took a puddle jumper back to Cape Cod and back home.
Oh, that's an amazing story. Thank you. When you said you went to a wild camp, the first camp that you were talking about, what was that?
Eagle Base?
Yeah.
That's been on the news. A couple of people have talked about how they got out through the secret base. And that was the base, also known as the brick factory or the salt pits. It has kind of a checkered history with CIA activity there. But as soon as we left the next day, they had rigged the whole place and they blew it up. They had been burning cars all week and they blew the entire base up before they left. That was the bang after the Daesh explosion that scared the whole city. You could hear it in the whole city.
Wow. Okay, that's an incredible story, and I can see how it's still very emotional to tell it. It must have been just unbelievable to go through that. Neesha, do you want to tell us what you were doing on your end?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I, I thank you all for being here tonight and for allowing this opportunity to continue to talk about this really, really horrible thing that happened, that is still happening to many, many people that we left behind. And thank you, Jill, for everything that you just said. I mean, that's a lot more than what we hear from a lot of individuals, and it's great to hear it from you, and especially with your history and your work history there. So again, I'm Neesha. I'm from Congressman Seth Moulton's office. Prior to the fall of Kabul on August 15th, our office was working with special immigrants. So these are the translators or former military members that worked with U.S. Army officials or other branches. And my boss has been, in particular, interested and invested in the special immigrant visa processing because he was personally involved with it. He, as a Marine, served with translators and even went through the process to bring one of his interpreters here from Iraq. And so he's been since 2015, really, always every year in the NDAA will add new visa categories or numbers to the visa category for special immigrants. And he recognizes the specific threat and risk that these individuals have. And so prior again to the fall of Kabul on August 15th, we had about 8 or 9 individuals who were applying for special immigrant visas. For a number of reasons, this program has been slowed out or stalled completely in some situations under the past administration, which contributed to all of these backlogs and really did not help the chaos that was withdrawal. So we had been, again, processing about 8 or 9 of these petitions, and then in that 2-week time frame had been contacted by over 4,500 families or cases, all trying to get individuals out of Afghanistan, obviously including Rabbi Abramson and Jill. And this was Jill's situation, I think, was unique. Every situation that came through our office really was heartbreaking. But Jill was the most calm of everybody, for sure. And even in times when her parents may not have been, she really, I think, was, it was helpful for me to talk with her and just communicate back and forth, because there was never, it seemed in either of our minds, a question of whether she would get out. There was always going to be a commitment from the U.S. Either military or State Department officials that they would get her out safely. The question was always about her assistant and the other people that were put in harm's way because of our involvement over there. And so I think it takes a lot of, courage to say the absolute least, never mind anything else, to be in that type of situation and not focus only on yourself. I think there were some times when I was like, you just need to go. It just has to be you. And she was really committed. And I mean, this person is probably alive today because of Jill. And that is not something that many people can say that they have done. So again, our involvement in this, in particular with Jill's case, was communicating back and forth with the State Department, with DOD, with literally any person, any human that we knew, and same with Jill. I mean, she was doing it as well, and we're still experiencing this. Any person that we know that is in the executive branch, we were trying to find their cell phone numbers, email them, call them. We were trying to get any answers. We were trying to figure out any way possibly that we could find out information, get our people out, deal with U.S. citizens that were there, try to get them to safety. And we still have a lot of people who are there. I have a U.S. citizen family who didn't want to leave because in a similar fashion, they were nervous about their direct family members who don't have the status to be evacuated. And so they couldn't live leaving with them, without them. So a lot of really, really difficult decisions were made in a very short time. And our office had to, because of obviously the numbers, the sheer number of individuals that we were hearing from, prioritize within even priorities. So Jill, of course, was a high priority as a US citizen. We have dealt with US citizens who have been stranded overseas before. And so we've had to, talk with our US embassy partners, the consulate, again, State Department officials in DC, and really anybody else. But in this situation, everything was different. We didn't have a US embassy. They had left. Some came back, and we had some special forces that were going out and about, but we didn't have their contact information, obviously. They were busy, and risking their lives. So it was at once like something that we've done before, and at the same time something that we've never ever had to deal with, and I hope never have to deal with again. And I think the hard part is that it shouldn't have happened this way. Obviously, it shouldn't have happened this way for anybody. But what we're faced with now is who is left behind, and the limited intel we have on the ground to get them to safety or protect them now. And so we're still, as an office, after this, I have a call. I have a 9 o'clock call on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays with an ad hoc veterans group trying to figure out how to get people through borders or across the land routes, or even through other charters, just anything. And I think that has been the most inspiring thing, to meet people like Jill, to be able to reconnect with the rabbi, and then also to see these volunteers step up when really the government has not done its correct job. So I'll stop talking there, as I always go on. But I really appreciate the time again, and thanks for continuing to focus on this.
Thanks. Can you tell us like anything specific about like what you might have done specifically that might have actually gotten Jill out?
Sure. So we had a separate line. Like generally, congressional offices have specific contacts with each individual embassy or consulate. We had, during the withdrawal crisis, the State Department stood up a task force. Everybody got the task force email and number, and they were completely bogging it down. So we were going through DOD. Just because they were present and they were honestly more receptive. So when Seth went, he found a lot of contacts on the ground. There were a lot of Marines that were willing to share their WhatsApp information, all that kind of thing. And so that's really like what was happening on our end, is that we would talk to the people who were opening the gates, and we would say, this person in this color shirt with this color hair is coming at this time at this location, like, please be ready for it, things like that. And so they were, of course, they had to prioritize US citizens as opposed to anybody else. I had a spouse of a US citizen who doesn't have status, who was turned away, despite me like doing that exact formula of like WhatsApping with the people at the gates. So that's the level of involvement we were at. And I mean, you can't, like, that took a lot of time and energy. I think, as Jill mentioned, like they said, as part of her, there were the 2 instances where we thought she was going to get out. There was another time when I was told that things were going to happen, at which point I kind of let, and it just didn't. And then we heard plenty of situations where, again, like helicopters, and it was always like, go to this location, go to that location. And it was so very challenging there. So again, what we did is like, we just completely barraged our contacts, both official side, unofficial side, anybody that we knew that had worked at the State Department, either presently or previously, but really where we got through was DOD for sure.
So I have one question from the Weidmans for Jill. What motivated you to do this work in Afghanistan specifically versus other parts of the world?
Sure. So I went to grad school in 2010. I had been in Africa, in Tanzania, in undergrad. So I kind of assumed I would end up working in Africa again, but by the time 2010 rolled around, it was sort of the peak of the war in Afghanistan, also Iraq and Syria, but more Afghanistan. So that interested me. I knew from all of my travels that I had a constitution to deal with uncertain places and uncertain situations. And, somebody needed to go and do the work. I didn't realize how many obstacles there would be between wanting to do the work and being able to do the work. But somebody had to go and do it. So I figured, why not me?
Where is your assistant currently?
Sure. Rabbi, or my assistant, he was in Ramstein Air Force Base for about 2 months. There was a measles outbreak, and they wanted to vaccinate them for COVID and measles, so they shut it all down for 3 weeks. He was just moved recently to Kosovo. He did his FBI interview just recently, so hopefully he'll be able to come to the States. Most likely he'll end up on a base in the States, and they'll continue processing until he's ready to be placed somewhere.
I have another question. Will you return to Afghanistan?
Yes, so that is the current focus, the big focus. My plans with the benefit corporation that would fund the nonprofit, and then that would fund the cutting school, and that would fund the nonprofit. I'm still intending to go forward with that. I hope to be back in the country before the new year, either by commercial airport or there's some other avenues back in. I know a lot of foreigners who've already gone back in to continue their work on other issues. So what I'm going to do, based on what the Taliban has said is allowed, and also the Department of Treasury has met and given a waiver to nonprofits and humanitarian efforts to operate there without sanctions. So I'm going to go back and build the trade school. I'm going to go back, I'm going to do it as a nonprofit. I'm going to recruit and train these women, do the pilot program. I'm doing a GoFundMe for that, and hopefully going to get some support from some embassies once I get a chance to go to DC. From there, there's a very small window of opportunity here on the sort of diplomatic side of things. The Taliban is playing a nice Taliban game, and it's a game, and we all know it's a game, but it is also an opportunity. They're playing this nice game so that they can get support from the international community on the things that are their responsibility now because they're a government. But they don't have the resources or the know-how, or they have no idea what they're doing, and they're scrambling. So they've already asked the UN to stay, they've asked UNICEF to stay, the hunger agencies have all met with them in Kabul, Herat, and Kandahar. They've gotten permission to operate. The Swedish committee is working really hard to get permission for females to operate equally as they did before, and they're very close to, recently I think they got that agreement. If we don't engage and don't show them that playing this nice game gets us to take on feeding some people and employing some people so that they have less to do and we can hopefully avert a famine that we're on the precipice of, they will keep playing that nice Taliban game. And that gives us the chance over the next years and months and years to keep engaging and keep teaching girls and keep employing people, keep feeding people. So the school will be an all-female trade school, and it will lead into an all-female work floor. And that was my plan originally anyway, because of social restrictions. Just having the gender separated gets people focused on their work, and it will appeal to them. So I've got people on the inside in Kabul. I still have my office there. I have staff keeping it maintained. I'm doing a fundraising push. I'm looking for funders and also sponsors, different kinds of in-kind support, and hoping. I've gotten some good responses from the Northern European embassies. They've always done smaller direct action programs, so they're more open to what I'm doing. So that's where I am. I've shifted gears from trying to raise for the benefit corporation, a seed round with angel investors and all that, to now it's a nonprofit effort. We'll figure out how to deal with paying taxes to a Taliban government. We'll figure that out later, but we need to get our foot in the door now. So that's the plan.
I'm getting lots of questions about your safety going back there at this point. How safe would you feel going back there, even with the nice Taliban?
Yeah, this is it's tricky, and it's not as black and white as people think it is, and it's not as crisis situation as the news thinks it is. If you're a translator, yes, you are at risk. If you're a female judge, yes, you are at risk. If you're a local journalist who has reported on the Taliban, yes, you're at risk. Everybody else is getting left alone right now. And there's no guarantee that'll be forever, but the Taliban is a force of 75,000 trying to keep control of an area the size of Texas with 35 million people in it. They have, the last time around they had nothing. It was Stone Age. This time they have a functioning metropolis with power and internet and cellular service, and they're working really hard just to keep that alive. So of the foreigners that have come back, journalists and people that working in private companies, some hunger agency people, they have found the Taliban actually exceedingly polite. And exceedingly, they do not bother the foreigners, they do not bother women traveling. They just put their eyes on the ground and ignore you. And in order to do this, I realized I'm going to have to get their permission. It's not just a matter of me going and deciding that I'm American and I'm going to fix it all. I need their at least permission to do it. I'm not going to work with them. I'm not going to abet them. I'm not going to give them any resources or any help. But I need to sit with someone either in Qatar or in Kabul or elsewhere and get them to say, yes, I want to teach women a durable skill, a physical, skilled trade, and I'm going to give them a place to work when they're finished being training. And that's all we're doing. Nothing political, nothing offensive, nothing mixing of the genders, just keeping this very simple school and jobs. And that's the reason why they're going to, the same as they have with the other organizations. They'll accept it, they'll tell their guys to not interfere, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I was been doing some research on this, and I saw an interview on Al Jazeera with one of their reporters interviewing one of the Taliban ministers and asking these questions like what about the women? You know, you're saying we want a relationship with the United States and the European countries, but they're not going to want to play well with you guys unless they have some assurances that the women there who had a certain degree of freedom will be ensured that continuing freedom. And the guy was trying to couch it in a positive way, but he ultimately said, well, women have to abide by the laws of the Quran, and our interpretation of the Quran, and that's how women, will need to be involved in the society going forward. So to me,
yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, we need to calibrate for an Islamic way of life and not just a Western way of life. Because we can't criticize the Afghans for acting in many ways exactly the way the Saudis act. There are restaurants that are divided for families and men. That's the same way the Taliban would have it. There are universities for women and universities for men. In theory, that's what the Taliban would want. The sticking point is, and there's no point arguing with that, whether we think it's good or bad to mix the genders, they're saying separate them. Okay, so let's treat that as our constraint. Within that constraint, what's going to happen is there's already not enough schools for the boys and the girls. Afghanistan schools run half days. It's half days with one set of students and half days with another set of students. So they're already only getting 4 hours a day. So what it will come down to is the Taliban will say, we can absolutely let women learn because the Quran says they can learn, but they cannot learn once they reach the age of puberty. They cannot learn anywhere near a man. They cannot learn from a man cannot see them, strange, unfamilial men cannot see them. So if you just account for that, you remove most of the conflict. You just say, I'm not gonna sit here and argue with a Talib about whether I think boys and girls should learn together. Do I? Yes. Am I gonna fight him about it? No. Because if I don't fight him about it, that gives me a window to say, okay, then within your rules, within your laws, within Sharia, within Purdah, what can we do to make sure these girls still learn and still work?
Awesome. This is really fascinating. This is like way more even than I was hoping that you would talk to us about. So another question is, who and what agencies might protect you in case you need protecting?
Overtly, none. Covertly, some. Much like the evacuation, the guys in the office of the American Coordination Cell, I'm 95% sure that was CIA. So in theory, if I was to go in there and get myself lost in the desert and radio in, somebody might send a helicopter. But I've lived abroad for long enough and through enough countries that I never built that into my, plans. I was robbed in Dushanbe when I lived there for a year and tried to get help from the embassy, and they gave me the runaround, and the embassy is 10 kilometers out of town, and he stole my wallet. How can I pay for a taxi? So I just never built that into my plans. I always built my local network. Where can I go for safety? Who can I rely on? And what are my options? At the time of the evacuation, I didn't really see going to the airport, especially with my assistant, as an option, because I knew he would be stopped most likely, and then they would know he was with an American, etc. So I looked for the exit through, the State Department, the gate at the MOIA, and the gate here and the gate there, because those were more legitimate and safer, in my mind, safer and more legitimate ways to go than to try to force through a crowd. So it's all about just sort of making those preparations ahead of time.
Great. And I have another question here. In your opinion, is the Taliban an even remotely organized entity, or is it just a disjointed collection of different groups who don't take direction from a single set of leaders?
It's both. It's both, and it's very complicated. They literally dwell in caves. The guys that came down and are currently walking the streets of Kabul, my assistant called them mountain people. They're mountain people. Like, they literally just walked off a mountain with the clothes on their back. But the Taliban has also been in Qatar for 5 years or more, with every advantage and every opulence and the internet and all of these things. They've also learned how to negotiate. They've learned how to steal a negotiation from the greatest nation on earth and the most spectacularly failed negotiation I've ever seen in my life. But they managed to do that. They managed to keep the pressure up and keep smiling and nodding, and they got everything they wanted at the end. So they are not an unsophisticated group. Their abilities are somewhat limited. They don't have engineers. They don't have, philosophical thinkers, but they know how to coordinate. That said, they are very fractured. In the last 20 years, every time we've killed one of their leaders or one of their senior commanders, the men under them fought over who was the legitimate next leader in line. And that often caused the Taliban to splinter. So it is also a roughly 19 splinter groups that don't always get along and don't always agree. So the Taliban themselves have said, you need to give us time to get all of our people on the same page, because we're allowing this, but we're not allowing that. And we're allowing, hijab, but not nikah. And some of the guys on the ground haven't bought that story yet. But at the end of the day, they are quite loyal to their commanders, and they do follow their lead. So once the commanders get in line, you should see a bit more stabilization. I don't think they're going to go full 1998 Stone Age unless all of their political and diplomatic channels are basically dead to them. So we can't label them as not sanctions, and we can't label them as someone we'll never work with. It needs to be some sort of in-between place where we acknowledge they're a terrorist group. We acknowledge that we've sanctioned them in the past, but we need to do these humanitarian things with them so that they don't fall off a cliff and start doing that, old stuff.
So there's an advantage to working with them from a humanitarian perspective. But I wonder, is the Taliban, from what you said, the Taliban is kind of one entity with splinter groups, but is there like a lot of infighting that you know about? Or
not so much anymore. There has been at times, and they will get into little scuffles over stuff. But at the end of the day, like the high leader, the Akhundzada guy and the Baradars and those guys, they're sort of their, pope or their president or their figurehead. So they will fall in line behind them. There'll be squabbles over, well, should it be a hijab or a nikah? What should it be? But aside from that, I think they will fall in line. I think, it remains to be seen. It's such a small number of guys who are used to doing whatever they want for the most part and having only their local commander to report to. And now they're trying to organize, even just to get them to direct traffic. guys were struggling. So I think as long as we keep them busy and engaged, we have better chances of them just living life and trying to keep the city running.
Great. There's another question here. Is the GEM idea now gone? And if so, what trades will you teach the women?
They're not actually. The Treasury Department is meeting this week with some members of the Responsible Jewelry Council and a few other top officials to figure out a way to make a sort of a waiver system within the sanctions so that nonprofit efforts like mine and similar ones can operate with those gemstones. Because otherwise, the Taliban already traffics them, maybe 50%. If nobody gets involved, they'll just traffic 100% and they'll get all the money from it. So people are looking for those avenues. That said, I've also got plans. I've been contacted recently by a woman who works with fashion brands, like higher end fashion brands, not fast fashion, to do sewing of individual pieces from pre-cut pieces of fabric and earning quite a decent living from that. So I've been contacted about that person. The other major ones will be agriculturally based. Most of the processing happens in Iran or Pakistan or further away, but there could easily be a leather industry, there could be a juice industry, there's spinning wool and cotton. There's all kinds of ways that local people can use local knowledge to create an economy. Eventually, I'd like to do like a 250 woman trade school, but I'm going to start with like a 25 woman pilot. Those women can become, team leaders and supervisors when we do the larger pilot. So I've done all the planning out for it. It will still lead into the for-profit when we can. The only problem is that because the for-profit's not paying for it, the nonprofit just got more expensive. Because we're starting with startup office and core staff and office furniture, office supplies. Those all should have come from the for-profit. Now we're starting without them. So it's a little more expensive. It's going to be a little harder to fundraise, but we'll do what we can.
And do you have a whole, there must be a whole group of people who you're talking with. I mean, you can't do it all yourself.
No, that's right. I should have mentioned. Yeah, I've got a board. I did a business incubator this spring, and then I started building my board. So I've got the head of Afghan policy for NATO is on my board. A director at the Ministry of Commerce, the former Ministry of Commerce of Afghanistan, is on my board. A couple of people with expertise in international development projects and platforms. David Katz, who's a 40-year expert on Afghanistan. I've got jewelry designers, I've got marketers, I've got strategic people for just business operations in general. So, it's challenging, but we're definitely moving forward.
That's incredible. Yeah. So before we end, I just wanted to ask how our congregation can be helpful in this moment. If you and Neesha and Norman, who's here.
I was just saying, we got the GoFundMe. I'm going to go to DC. If anybody has any contacts with any foundations or corporations or people who might write a grant for us, I would love those connections. Any connections to potential sponsors. We're going to need office equipment and laboratory tables and, even just equipment and shoes and clothing for staff and the women we're helping. So any companies that would like to contribute to that or become a sponsor, definitely open to that.
And Neesha or Norman, are there other ways that are there individuals that we know of coming here or that might need our support?
Yeah, I mean, there are individuals from Afghanistan coming into our communities every day. We've already had, I think, close to 25 individuals that were evacuated be resettled in Massachusetts. Primarily, they've been out in the Worcester area, but we've had 2 individuals who are living in Ipswich now. One as recently as Saturday was resettled, and we know that hundreds more are coming in the next 3 to 6 months. So again, it's all about what you guys are willing and able to contribute. I mean, there's going to be a whole host of social, emotional intangible items that are needed for this type of resettlement. Housing is a huge one. We all know how expensive it is to live on the North Shore. And so if anybody knows anybody who does the Airbnb kind of thing, if they're hosts, there's a special discount or program that's running through Airbnb. If you have housing, or if you know landlords, if you are a landlord and you're willing to contribute from that component, you can talk with some of the resettlement agencies in Massachusetts to offer that service up. But there are plenty of ways to give back from this perspective, and not everybody that is coming here is going to be a translator. So it's helpful to have that that veteran community standing up for the civs that come this way, but there are going to be plenty of people who do not, and so again, they'll need some extra love and attention as they get settled here and build a new life.
Yeah, I mean, one question, because I've been starting to think about housing for people, and I didn't know if there were any agencies or government agencies which would be providing money for rent if we were to find.
Yeah, so through the normal or the standard refugee process, individuals are resettled with funding for, like, they get a one-time stipend, they come with resettlement money and something for rent. They also get like educational services so that they can start getting a job and contributing towards that rent after a certain amount of time, usually 8 months, which isn't nearly long enough, but so most of them will come with that stipend or that funding, which will be helpful. But again, it's not going to be a lot. There's a one-time stipend of like, I think $1,500 plus like a monthly stipend. So from that perspective, that's good. For some individuals who are going to be coming in as parolees, we've changed the law so that those parolees will be covered through the same refugee process, which my boss was really instrumental in doing, and I think is critical because just like technically we messed up the way that we brought them here, so we just need to technically fix it and then give them that money. So in short answer to your question, they should all come with some sort of money, but money will definitely need to be raised for them as well.
Excellent, thank you. I have another question for Jill. Somebody just asked, as a Jew in Afghanistan, are you able to at all like practice your faith, admit to your faith? How is that?
Yeah, I'm definitely cautious about it. And it's less really the Afghans, because there was a Jewish community in Afghanistan, and there was the last Jew that everybody's heard about, and everybody loves him. I haven't met him personally, but apparently he's a highly amusing fellow. And the Afghans, who I have trusted enough to tell, have been very open. And if they're following the Quran truly and not ideologically, we are people of the book. We are people that God delivered a book to before their book. So we are supposed to be treated with mutual respect and not forced to convert and not forced to change anything. We're supposed to be treated with the same respect as another Muslim. So, and the people I've trusted with that information have largely, I don't think anybody, it's interesting to not say anything, because I hear the people in the room and what they really think before the truth comes out. So that's been helpful. I mean, blonde hair, blue eyes, people don't automatically assume. So I'm kind of like the undercover Jew.
When you go back, like, will there be many other foreigners still there, or?
Certainly not on the scale as before. I know people that didn't leave, a lot of journalists, some people with the Hunger Organization, some people who just have family there, who just didn't leave and never intended to leave. I know several people who have already come back, some people who evacuated with military, flew directly to Uzbekistan, got in a car and came back overland 13 hours to Kabul with a Taliban escort. Thank you very much. So it's possible. It's not going to be the way it was. And I actually came sort of towards the tail end of that anyway. Programming had started to tail off. There weren't as many projects. There weren't as many, the drawdown had already happened with the military, and with it, a lot of the projects closed. So there already weren't that many in town. Those of us going back, this is the silver lining. It's kind of the reset nobody wanted and nobody is happy about. But the crazy corruption of the last years is over. it comes with a whole new set of problems, but dealing with the structures of the programs and the money and the games and anybody who is in it just for the money is probably not coming back. And I'm thankful for that, because it should make it easier to actually do good work without all that noise.
I wanted to thank you so much for spending this time with us, and I think we all learned a lot, and thank you again to Neesha for everything that you did to help Jill get out, and Jill, we're thrilled to have you, and I know your parents are on this call. They're thrilled, I know, and we're so happy for them. And
yeah, thanks for having me, and thank everybody for your interest in not just me but Afghanistan, and hopefully keep it going.
Yeah, and I just, I think I've told you a couple of times that our whole community, I mean, you had no idea how many people were, very, very concerned about your welfare, and just kind of watching, I would report on your steps to your departure, and lots of people in our temple were just praying for you, and are so thrilled that you're here and safe. And I just want you to know that your whole community that you grew up in is still very much behind you, and very supportive of you. So
I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate Neesha for your efforts, and I'll hopefully be seeing you soon. And this is a good, interesting for me too. So I appreciate the questions.
So thank you very much, and thank you everybody for participating, and Jill, good luck and best wishes. Thanks so much for joining us. We wish Jill, along with all the people of Afghanistan, particularly the women, a future of health and happiness and equality and peace. Shalom, salam, shanti, peace.